The Lord Be With You podcast show, also known as Christian Fandom Geek on YouTube, is a Red 5 show, also affiliated with Fandom Collective. So, enjoy the show, and the Force will be with you very soon on the Lord Be With You podcast show.
This is where the fun begins.
So, to make it more down to earth, to think about these multiverse ideas in a more tangible way, think of something like this. Let's think of a good example. Okay, a coffee shop. I love coffee. My wife loves coffee. Well, my wife loves tea, but we love coffee shops. And I think I have referred to this. I have mentioned this in a previous episode. I think it's on the Jackson Multiverse episode that we do frequent a nice Costa coffee, or sometimes even Starbucks from time to time. We do love coffee shops, and I'm a coffee guy. My wife's a tea woman, so we do like things like that. So think of this now. Okay, you go to a coffee shop, and it's a metaphysical, special coffee shop, and it deals with, rather than just normal, lattes or cappuccinos, it deals with multiverses and universes. So think of it like this. Okay, if you're dealing with a cosmological multiverse, and we're talking about the multiverses that you don't really get in the TV shows, like you don't really get it in Marvel or DC, you will get a sort of, that type of universe that type of multiverse is a coffee shop where, okay, you have to have everything there. You obviously have to have your coffee beans, you have to have your milk, your sugar, you have to have the machine there to make it and whatnot. Okay. And so if you've got all those parts together, which is kind of what you think of as fine tuning, then you can make yourself a nice cup of coffee, or a nice cappuccino or latte, Americano, whatever drink you like. But now, if any of those parts are missing, so you don't have the right coffee beans, you don't have the right machine to do it at the right temperature, you don't have the right milk, you don't have the right sugar or syrups or whatever, then what happens is you're not going to get that perfect cup of coffee that you want. Okay, that's fine. That's the fine tuning argument, really, where if you've got everything together and everything's in the right portion, you have the right amount of coffee, the right amount of milk, the right amount of syrup at the right temperature, and it's all put together correctly, the right way, then you're going to get that coffee. Now think of it like this. If you've got now the other type of multiverse, you go to a different room in this coffee shop, and they're still doing coffees, but it's a different room. And so the multiverse that you get in DC and in Marvel is more the multiverse, which is kind of with the doppelganger effect, which I mentioned earlier, where it's almost every version is almost identical, but there are different events, contingent events that take place where there's different choices or different scenarios that play out. So the reality is different based on those a branching effect of different choices and different things playing out. But the physics of it is kind of the same in every version of it. So in that version of the coffee house, in that coffee room, you've always got the coffee there, you've always got the cup, you've always got the milk, you've always got the machine at the right temperature. It's all there, it's always set. But what might happen is this: maybe when you're coming for a coffee that day, you don't want a coffee. Maybe you want a hot chocolate, or maybe you want a cup of tea, or maybe you want normally you have an Americano, maybe you want a latte instead, or maybe you want a cappuccino instead. So it's just choices that are there, but the actual component parts, all the things that are needed to make the coffee, is always there on that version of reality. Whereas in the cosmological room, sometimes basically, if you don't have it all there, you don't even get it. You don't get a coffee at all. There's no cup, there's no coffee beans. You don't get anything on that thing. And that's like the universe on that version of reality with fine tuning. On some versions of it, you won't even get a universe. You won't even get laws of physics that are capable of producing stars and therefore producing planets, etc., for even to have any type of intelligent human being or human type creature to live on. So I hope that kind of coffee shop metaphysical idea tries to make it a little bit more understandable for these multiverse situations. They're not always straightforward to understand, but they are interested, and if you can bring it in a narrative, obviously like with the comic books which are happening right now, comic books always lean heavily into multiverse, because the beauty of it in comic books is that you can always do different things, a what if scenario with your favorite characters. and you can always bring characters back. So if you kill off Batman in one version of the Earth, you can always bring in a Batman from a different Earth. So you can always kind of bring characters back because they're always a part of the multiverse ensemble. So it gives you a lot of explanatory power. It gives you a lot of storytelling range, and it allows you to play with characters while maintaining in-world logic and continuity. So that's kind of the beauty of it. So, I hope you're enjoying this multiverse episode of the show, and we'll be with you in the next segment of this show. Be with you very soon on the Law Be With You podcast show. Welcome back to the Law Be With You podcast show, also known as Christian Fandom Geek on YouTube. Just a little geek knowledge for you guys out there, guys and girls who are into the Law Be With You podcast show and are really enjoying our multiverse episode. Just thinking about the technicalities of multiverse, it's really interesting to go into it, but sometimes it can be quite complicated, or you can start to think, how do I understand multiverse in a sort of more, sort of reasonable way that kind of a layman can approach it and broach this topic. And obviously the comic book TV shows, Marvel, DCEU and other franchises are really broaching, these multiverse ideas as we've already spoken about. Now in science, and I'm not, let me just throw this out there as a disclaimer, I'm not a cosmologist, I'm not a scientist, but I do take interest in science and in cosmology. Being a geek, which is quite typical for someone who's got a show called Christian Fandom Geek on YouTube. And like I've already mentioned, I came at it from a kind of Christian apologetics angle. And I find these ideas really fascinating. And from what I understand, really, trying to make it as simple as possible, you really would look at sort of Big Bang Theory. Now, I would class myself as a Big Bang theorist, but would still obviously be like, that God is involved and is the author of the whole process sort of thing. But from this sort of Big Bang inflation, and we spoke about Alan Guth, his inflation theory. Now, if you think about it as well, there are scientists as well that will talk about before the Big Bang there would be a quantum era, and that's a really interesting idea, even within itself. Whether you could say, is the quantum era before the Big Bang, or does the quantum era come into being at the same time, using the word time, which is not a really great word in this situation, but at that same moment in time as the Big Bang, as the universe comes into being, does the quantum era also come into being right at that point? It's an interesting question, but there's certainly some scientists will say that there's the quantum era, and then from that you've got the Big Bang, and you've got our physical world instantiated. Now, really interesting stuff. But from that, you've got this sort of idea that Alan Guth's theory of inflation, multiple universes from this sort of explosion of energy, which will later become the universe and come together as stars, and those stars will go through nuclear fusion and will go into stellar recycling, and then you'll get the planets coming from black holes and things like that. So from this process you get the planets, but also it's a process, you get the stars, you get the planets, but it's a process that from the inflation model from Alan Guth, we spoke about the Bohr-Guth-Vilenkin theory, you get sort of the idea that there could be multiple worlds. It's really interesting stuff, but it's one of those things where you can kind of think, there isn't ironclad proof that it is exactly that way. So you can run the physics, you can run the maths, and actually come to completely different conclusions. Some scientists will look at the data and will say, "Nah, there's probably just one single universe, and that's that." Yeah, you can have the inflation theory, but it doesn't really mean that there are necessarily going to be multiple universes coming from that. So you can run it different ways, and that's the beauty of science and philosophy, and philosophers of science. They will argue and debate those things, and the data is quite open to interpretation. But it's just interesting anyway. Now, thinking about, obviously, because we're thinking from a pop culture point of view, like you've got Marvel's What If TV show and other shows. Now, this is quite interesting because Marvel's What If TV show is obviously quite a popular show at the moment. That can be kind of thought of as a multiverse TV show, as in, oh, this is what's going on. This is what's happened, with Captain America. If, Captain America is his girlfriend, basically. If she's Captain America and Steve isn't Captain America, but he's just like, the sidekick or whatever. Look, she ends up being Captain Britain and he's doesn't take the serum and whatnot. Really interesting. That idea for me is what I'd call a virtual universe or a virtual reality. It's the idea, philosophers call it counterfactual knowledge. So it's an idea of that you are thinking of different scenarios that could play out, and those they become almost like hypothetical worlds. It's called a counterfactual knowledge of reality. It's a different world, kind of based on our laws of physics, but it's just, if you've got our laws of physics and things play out differently, the contingent things in reality play out differently, what could that universe be? And in this thought experiment, you can then swap roles around. You can say, well, rather than this person becoming Captain America, this other person becomes Captain Britain, and blah, blah, blah. You can start to play around with things, kind of like what they do in the DCEU with Flash. It's the same idea with that sort of scenario which we spoke about earlier, the Flashpoint. So you can start to play around with, this person does this person does that, and you start to. I mean, there's some folks that think that Star Wars should do it. I've come across, and I've been reading on Twitter some Star Wars fans within fandom saying, why don't we do a what if for Star Wars? And what if Leia's the main Jedi and Luke's the Prince of Alderaan, and so the hero's journey is from Leia's point of view, and how would that look? And Leia's been trained by Ben Kenobi, and Leia, goes to fight Vader and things like that, and all these interesting ideas, and they're a lot of fun. They really are. And like I say, then you can think of them as multiverse ideas, but actually they don't even need to be a multiverse. They can just be this is what could have happened instead. So that's just a little way to think about that. Obviously, in terms of the multiverse scenarios, when we're looking at multiverse in TV shows, they don't tend to go towards the sort of cosmological multiverse that I've kind of spoke about here, sort of bubble universes branching off from the Big Bang, from a single sort of point. The sort of multiverse that you get in TV shows, like the Flash, like the DCEU sort of ideas, and even what Marvel are going to be doing. Those sort of multiverses are kind of an idea of the many worlds theory of quantum mechanics, and it's a little bit different. So when you're looking at multiverse scenarios, there's not just one type of multiverse. There's lots of types of multiverse models, and they're not all the same. So the many worlds theory of quantum mechanics, and Sean Carroll is a cosmologist, atheist cosmologist, who is really knowledgeable about the universe and got some interesting ideas to do with quantum mechanics. And he is a proponent of the Hugh Everett version, the Everettian version of quantum mechanics, which is the many worlds theory. And this theory is that you could say there's not lots of different universes. There's just kind of almost like one universe, and it's copied or branches off, and you have different scenarios play out in that universe. But it's not like it's not a cosmological multiverse. It's not like there's millions of universes or billions of universes with different laws of physics. It's not like that. It's that the laws of physics are kind of probably the same in all of these versions of reality. They're probably kind of the same or very similar, but it's just that there's a version of you in that reality that there's a version of you that didn't go to uni. There's a version of you that did go to uni. There's a version of you that went to a different university than the version you go to. And so you have this sort of doppelganger effect where you have different versions of you different versions of your friends, different versions of your family, different versions of your university, different versions of your workplace, and they all are slightly different based on different scenarios and choices that play out. And so in the TV shows, like you see in Flash, where there's different Earths and things like that, like there's there's Earth 1, Earth 2, there's Earth 20, there's Earth 25, there's loads of different Earths. You'll see that the contingent reality plays out differently. There's different choices, there's different scenarios that play out, and therefore the instantiation of those things means that the events that happen in those different worlds are different. They have different narratives, they have different storylines, but the physics of those worlds are generally the same or similar. Whereas if you're looking at a cosmological multiverse, the physics of those worlds would be very different. In a cosmological multiverse, maybe only one or two of those universes would have conditions that would have fine tuning to be able to have life in those universes. They play out very, very differently. And so this is just a few ideas, a bit of geek knowledge for you guys. And we will talk about multiverse again in another episode, because it's really exciting and a lot of fun. And so I hope you got a lot from that.